Welcome. I'm Michael Taylor, Program Coordinator at Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration. Let me introduce my panel. First and foremost, I have Adam Grant. Adam has a history of over 3 decades of incarceration, including 27 years of including 27 years straight for bank robbery he committed at the age of 22. He began his path of service serving as public relations director for the NAACP at Saginaw Correctional Facility. He has worked within other organizations in a variety of capacities, expanding educational programming, training group facilitators, providing mentoring and training, developing curriculum, and constructing the framework for a peer recovery coaching program. Adam is now the executive director of a Brighter Way organization. He believes that good reentry makes for better public safety and that if we invest in our returned citizens, there will be a brighter way ahead of us. Um, Following Adam is Ken Nixon. Ken Nixon joined Safe and Just Michigan in 2023 as Director of Community Outreach and Partnerships, bringing with him extensive experience in leadership and problem solving as a former president of a national organization for people who have been exonerated, including himself. As the president of the Organization of Exonerees, Nixon made public and private partnerships to help formerly incarcerated individuals. His work includes collaborations with the state of Michigan to help people obtain state-issued IDs and with top leadership at Huntington Bank to help them gain access to bank accounts. Nixon brings his problem-solving and coalition-building skills to Safe and Just Michigan, where he forms networks between criminal justice reform advocates, legislators, community organizations, and businesses, all with the goal of creating a better justice system for the state of Michigan. Nixon attends Wayne State University, where he is pursuing a bachelor's degree in political science and plans to later attend law school. He resides in Detroit. That said, last but definitely not least, Linda Sturmer. She's a working mother of five. She has the hobby of farm raising horses and attending kids' athletic events. January 7th, 2007, a fire broke out in the 41 square foot home where she was building and were living. Her husband died of thermal injuries, and her journey through the legal system began. After a quick conviction without any evidence, Linda began the journey to learn enough about the law to prove her innocence and overturn her wrongful conviction. Freed by the late Michigan District Court Judge Tarnow, December 20th, 2018, she has been awaiting trial ever since. Um, that being said, uh, after reading Linda's story, right, with her story still being open-ended, still having to go back to trial soon. I wanted to start with you, Linda, and answering this first question. Telling your story, especially repeatedly in public, can be challenging, right? How do you manage your boundaries and take care of yourself in sharing your story, specifically with the fact that there's still details that have to be ironed out?
Because I'm still in a legal posture, there are certain things that I cannot discuss. However, there are certain things that need to be discussed. So I have to really prepare myself and know what the context of the meeting is going to be and what role I need to play or what information is asked from me personally in order for me to successfully participate. There are certain times when I've had to turn down engagements because the information was just too close to my case and I couldn't have contributed anything without being in jeopardy of divulging certain things that can't be divulged at this time. So that's my boundary setting. I just have to be aware of what I can do to help in that particular setting. As far as taking care of myself, I had a meeting with my mental health therapist, my psychologist today that ended at 11:45 to prepare for today because It is still a very difficult situation to talk about, and it is a very emotional topic for me. So I need to mentally prepare not only prior to discussing certain aspects, but also afterwards. So sometimes I will have a mental health appointment after the engagement as well.
Appreciate that, Linda. Same question to you, Ken. With both of you being, well, exonerees, Linda's still in her process, but you all being an exoneree and having gone through something that you were not even guilty of. Um, how do you take care of yourself?
Um, I think for me, I find my joy in helping other people. So um, I really lean into the advocacy part of things. But outside of that, like the things that I enjoy outside of work are things like hiking and being around my dogs. Those are mentally healthy places for me to be. I have a deep distrust for people.
Hmm.
Even though like I've continuously sought a therapist, I've seen a therapist every week since the day I came home. We are very big on mental health awareness in the organization of exonerees, but also just in everyday people that I speak to that are formerly incarcerated. I think, you know, the huge part for all of us to understand is that we're messed up in a way that we don't understand sometimes. Sometimes we don't realize what our triggers are. Sometimes we don't realize how certain things affect us in ways that you might not know, you know, why you responded negatively to something. And, you know, I think for me, understanding myself, being while incarcerated, I did a lot of self-analysis and really trying to understand, you know, who I was as a person. But being on this side with all of the distractions and things that can blur your ability to self-analyze, having a neutral party to vent to that is not judging you, but only trying to help you, is something that is extremely important to me, right? I don't know that I can say that I don't get that from family or friends. More often than not, I actually get it from people that are formerly incarcerated, right? We can speak a language that not many people understand, or we can see things in each other that not many other people can see. That for me is something that is therapeutic. So taking care of myself, you know, again, helping other people is where I find my joy because I know for a fact that I've been able to fill some gaps for people from my own personal experience of reentry that I may not, or they may not realize they need, or they may not realize they want, or, you know, something may be triggering them that I can pick up on that not an everyday citizen would even realize half the time.
Appreciate that. And partly because from an exonerated perspective, it makes sense, right? You take care of yourself because, man, I was wrongly convicted and that was a lot of pressure. Um, Transitioning to Adam, though, you and I are a lot more similar in that we're guys who did it, we committed the crime, and we accept that whatever comes with the commission of the crime that we did, right? So it's a little harder for us to recognize that we need to maybe take care of our mental health or take care of ourselves because we walk around with the guilt or even the shame of having committed the crimes or having done what we were accused of, right? So kind of talk about that a little bit. How do you take care of yourself?
Well, I mean, one of the ways that I've dealt with that is that the best apologies changed behavior, and I've certainly changed my behavior. And I try and put that out there for other people too. Everybody's not meant to share their story. Everybody's not ready to share their story. So those of us who've really put in the work, who continue to get therapy, who continue to get, work on ourselves, kind of have a little bit of obligation to be able to share it in certain circles. Some of us share it on a grander stage. Some of us share it with people that we meet throughout the course of our lives. Anybody who knows me knows that my t-shirt game is tight because of my wife. And part of the reason my t-shirt game is tight is because it fosters conversations. So I like to have conversations where people are at in the grocery store. I can't tell you how many times I've been picking something up at the hardware store and people ask me, about something, we have a conversation about incarceration. So there's a natural self-care component to it, but I do see a therapist, because I don't care how good your car runs, you still need maintenance done to it. And you're going to miss some things. I don't care. You do 27 straight years, some stuff sticks to you, and life takes some bites out of you that you won't always recognize on your own. Um, so that's kind of how I do that. Plus, I got my person, and when you got your person, it makes it a lot easier because I've always got somebody to chop it up with.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I appreciate that. So, um, moving on to the next question, and I will direct it at you, Adam. Because your story also affects others, right? Your family, potentially your co-defendant, if they're victims, them and their families, the community, all of those other aspects. How do you how do you think about telling your story in a way that respects all of them, or have you given thought to that, like being able to tell your story in a way that's honest, right?
I
But
always
respectful.
do, even in the midst of it. In the midst of it, I'm always doing those kind of calculations. What should be shared, what shouldn't. But I also think it's kind of like the 12 steps when you're making amends to people. The people that you can do it directly to, you should. So some of my family members I've talked to about it, and I've talked about how I remember things and how they remember things. And so I don't want to expose them. To certain things they didn't necessarily know for the first time when they're watching me on a podcast or doing some kind of an interview. So my mom and I have had some really deep conversations, and I've simplified the story, of us. I don't have to go into all the details. Sometimes when you just start out as born to a 15-year-old mother, you don't have to get too deep into it. People understand some things. As far as victims, I've never mentioned their name, but I always honor them because for the longest time, I didn't realize how I had actually victimized people. I used to tell people it took 51 seconds to rob the bank in and out the front door. And then I found out that one of the individuals had locked themselves in the bathroom because they were so scared, and it lasted for 23 minutes for her. And then it also lasted for the rest of their lives because anytime they've ever heard about an armed robbery, I would assume that it impacts them. So I try and honor, um, the people. My life is my amends, but I don't need to re-victimize people making amends either.
Man, I appreciate that, especially the aspect of the podcast, because with myself being a podcaster, I can honestly say that I've done that. Surprised family members with just a conversation that I had on my show. I didn't think about it because I'm just telling my story. I didn't think about how my story would affect my mom hearing for the first time that I got hit with a lock while I was in prison, right? She didn't know that happened. So yeah, I appreciate that. And I guess moving forward, the same question to you, Ken, in your position, um, how do you respect the people that are inside of this that, you were accused of something and there's got to be feelings that you have, right? So how do you tell your story and also respect those that are connected to it?
I mean, it's hard. It's hard because in my particular situation, people were led to believe something was true that wasn't, only to have the injury reopened years later when, it was revealed that I wasn't the person that had committed the crime. So, in my situation, I honor them by, just I try to avoid re-injuring them in any kind of way, but it's hard when justice wasn't served, right? There were more victims created in a wrongful conviction than there was actually healing, because at the end of the day, it's still an open case. So it's extremely difficult for them to reconcile that the system got it wrong, right? But at the same time, for me, I'm also not the person you should be asking those questions to. I didn't lie to you for a decade and a half. The police did. The
Mhm.
prosecutor's office lied to you for a decade and a half. You were fed information by people that were giving you their opinion of what happened. None of it was based in facts. The fact that we do know exists is that I didn't commit this crime. I'm not I don't feel like I'm the person that should be explaining why these people lied to you all these years, right? But at the same time, I also, again, don't want to cause further injury by speaking negatively about it because, I mean, at the end of the day, there was a crime happened, someone died, people were injured. This is it's a very tough conversation to navigate from a person in my shoes. However, I don't know that I'm the person that should be trying to help them heal either.
Understandable, understandable. And I guess being a little cautious when I'm asking you, Linda, kind of similar, the same thing. I saw Chuck added to the chat also the addition of maybe the family members, right? Other people affected. With yours still ongoing and you still having to deal with that, how do you, uh, I guess, manage walking the tightrope of being respectful and aware of all that you have up in the air? You're on mute.
Okay, there it is. It is incredibly difficult, and being in a different situation adds a layer to that difficulty. I have to make sure to um, not bring certain people into everything. I can't mention people in my family by name. I can't participate with certain people. I can't have a relationship with certain people because as Ken said, I didn't lie to you. The office, whether it be the prosecutor's office, the police department, there is some entity that fabricated this case. And your children or your family are told by you, the very last thing I said to them before trial was, in the system, will be okay. That was a terrible thing for me to say, as it turns out. But I just have to leave them as uninvolved as they want to be uninvolved, or steer clear of them, as the case may be, because some people don't want anything to do with me and it hurts to just see me. So I have to stay away from certain areas. There are businesses, there are stores, there are I avoid, so that I don't open up dialogues with the wrong people and cause problems.
Got you. Um, Thanks for that, Linda. Especially, I'm not sure, there was like a little glitch, so I'm not sure if you guys caught that, but she said that the last thing that she told her family was trust in the system. It will be okay. That being said, right, it leads me to my next question, and that's for you, Ken. There's a balance between wanting to destigmatize, but also be real about the dynamics of crime and the criminal legal system. How do you balance those considering where you landed?
I think for me, it's a listen, I'm not crazy enough to sit before anybody and say we don't need the police or we don't need the court system or we don't need prisons. I'm not that person, right? I'm not an abolitionist that thinks we need to tear it all down and reconstruct it. Because the reality is, I've met some people in prison I wouldn't want to live next door to anybody I know, right? There are some people that I don't think deserve to be in the community. Those people are far and few between. Don't get me wrong. Like there's not a ton of them, but the reality is they do exist, right? And there should be a process for those people. However, I do think that, in my personal opinion, the system is can be overly intrusive into people's lives. And I think we don't ask enough questions when it comes to crime. I think, I'm the first person to tell you if we asked why that person committed the crime more often than not, we probably wouldn't punish them as severely as we do oftentimes. If
Mm,
we knew that that woman pushing a cart full of groceries out of Walmart was doing it because she had 4 kids at home and just lost her job, we'd probably look at her differently as opposed to calling her a shoplifter or a thief. If we knew that that kid that committed that carjacking last night did it because he's been sleeping in 17-degree weather for the last week and he wanted a warm place to sleep, we probably judge him differently. However, the system isn't designed to understand why people do the things that they do, right? It's built on punishment and retribution. So for me, it's always a difficult thing to reconcile when we never ask why. It's extremely difficult because for me as a person that knows and understands the negative sides of what it looks like when we get it wrong, I don't understand why we're not asking why. Why are we not having conversation about what's going on, right? I think we've grown, society has grown to a place where we have what I consider to be assembly line justice. We are stamping and go pass the person on to the next person. It's not about justice or retribution. Court-appointed attorneys aren't asking why things happen. They're trying to resolve the case as quickly as possible. I personally think we're wasting tons of resources by getting the court system involved in things that, quite frankly, could be resolved without the court system ever being involved, right? There's prosecutors making $100,000 to go stand in court and send somebody to diversion programs when the same exact outcome could have been handled between two people and a police officer. Like, I don't understand why the system insists on inserting itself in certain situations. But this is what happens when we give the wrong people too much power. So in my mind, the way that I navigate that is by being honest and upfront and really talking about both sides, right? I can speak to injustice as a citizen. I can speak to injustice as a victim. I can speak to injustice as somebody that has navigated the prison environment. I know what the bad side of all of that looks like.
I appreciate that, Ken. Linda, I started the question with the prompt from you, off of a quote that you said, trust in the system and it will be okay. With you, where you are in this system, you want to jump in and kind of talk to the, I guess, what I asked Ken, the destigmatizing, but being real about the dynamics of crime in the criminal legal system. Like, how do you balance those? Because you're kind of at that point, right, where they got you wrong, but you want your system to work for you.
I absolutely agree with everything that Ken said. Ken has a very insightful outlook on most things because he's had so long to look at a lot of things in a different perspective. I don't blame necessarily certain aspects of our system. We have human beings operating these systems, and there's always human error. There can be miscommunication between one investigator and another, and those details can lead down a wrong path. There can be an overzealousness to win office at a certain time of the year, and realizing that a case is important to that and their financial future. There can be so many reasons in between. We can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We just need some fresh bathwater. We need more rules in order to ensure a better outcome. We need responsibility and accountability. And I believe that sometimes the judicial system, as Ken said, the judicial system can victimize people that don't need to be victimized or shouldn't have been victimized. The families of a wrongfully incarcerated person, the community of a wrongfully incarcerated person, and everyone in between will be impacted adversely. But if there was accountability on the other side for, say, committing fraud that leads to a conviction, if there were consequences for those things, for those errors, but there's always going to be a mistake, and you can't always be so quick to point a finger at someone. You have to get to the bottom of why that mistake happened and figure out where things went wrong. But there's so many different pieces and parts to that puzzle that any place you begin is a good place. It just has to begin.
Appreciate that. Adam, you want to jump on and take a stab at that? You want me to reiterate the question for you?
No, I got it.
Okay.
I think about something that I told my brother one time after his divorce. I won't go into details because I'm gonna protect his story, but I just said,
Yes, sir.
stop worrying about impressing people and worry about being impressive. So when it comes to the destigmatization part of it, I don't do anything specific. It's not a matter of doing, it's a matter of being. The person that I have become, the work that I do, the way that I approach things, and my willingness to balance uncomfortable truths is a part of what does this kind of destigmatizing. Is the system flawed? Absolutely, it's flawed. I mean, the average, I'm guilty. There's no doubt about it. But the average sentence for a bank robbery for the 7 years surrounding my charge was 4 years. And I was given 27 to 50 and 2 for the gun. So there's a lot of injustices that take place in different ways. But ultimately, the destigmatization, I got teeth recently that make that a really complicated word, creates a lot of different situations that are all solved by one thing. Everything happens through relationship. So we will destigmatize things. We will change the system. We have relationships with people we never thought we'd have police relationships with. I practiced running from the police when I was 12, 13, 14 years old. To actually be sitting and breaking bread with them and talking about how to solve things, talking about things that are not only diversion, but like Ken said, the idea that some of these things that should never be bogged down in the system anyway. I spent 40 years in the legal system, 1982, and discharged off parole in 2022. Much of that was needed and much of it wasn't. And if somebody would have done the things like they said, ask the questions, things might have come out a lot differently. So the destigmatization and the actual legal system itself are kind of linked, and it's all through relationship.
Yeah, hey, I mean, there's not much more I can add to that. I think I want to acknowledge something you and I talked about, and that is a large part of that criminal legal system that we see in the way it's applied when it comes to racial implications and how it affects poor, black, brown, right? Um, we even spoke on it on the podcast how to an extent it seems as if like being white in prison, you still feel the connection to your freedom that you should. Whereas if you're black, you don't even feel like you deserve the freedom, right? You feel like you're kind of supposed to be there. So, and I say that to say that that's what my perspective on the system, the balance is, because I agree with Ken as well. I was in the penitentiary with some guys that I don't think need to be in our community at all, but it's not a lot of them. The majority of them just needed a why question asked. That being said, Ken, I want to kind of kick back to you and ask the question of how do you avoid throwing other people under the bus when talking about the criminal legal system? So not just the fact that, you were innocent and exonerated, but like also other people that are, say, have substance abuse disorders or violent crimes or sex offenses, etc. How do you avoid tossing anybody under the bus when you're telling your story?
I mean, for me, that's an easy one, right? I don't personally, I don't even understand the term throwing somebody under the bus because the reality is we're not fighting a person, we're fighting a culture. It's not the person that's the problem. It's the system that's the problem. It's the culture within police departments that's the problem. It's the culture within prosecutor's office that's the problem. It's not people that we're fighting. We're not fighting a person, we're fighting a uniform. It's the entire department that is causing these issues and inflicting harm amongst our communities, right? Yeah, it might be one bad officer that's worse off than others. The reality is the people in that department knew he was bad a long time ago. They chose not to do anything about it. So we're not fighting a person. We're fighting the system that allowed that person to operate to begin with. No one is going to convince me that a prosecutor waited 20 years into their career to start framing people, or a cop waited 30 years into their career to start planting drugs on people. No, it was acceptable. It was okay. And they continued to make it through the ranks without any punishment, right? You didn't just get to a George Floyd moment. That officer was doing that years before that was captured on film. But because there was no punishment, there was no lesson to be learned.
Hmm.
That was arrogance we watched play out in front of the world because it was acceptable within the department. Again, we're not fighting a culture. I mean, we're not fighting a person, we're fighting a culture. Anytime that egregious behavior is acceptable, especially when it comes to the legal community, we're talking about a community of people that basically have unchecked power to wreck people's lives. That's where we have an issue. So I don't know that there's a such thing as throwing somebody under a bus when we're talking about an entire department because nobody's exempt from it. Whether you're at the top or you're at the bottom, if you're at the top, you're responsible for the policies that play out below you, whether you know
Mhm.
them or not, right? No, that's literally what they tell us being incarcerated. It's your responsibility to
To
know
know the rules,
what the rules are, right?
for
So
sure.
it doesn't make you exempt. The higher you go does not make you more exempt from ridicule. The reality is it's your responsibility to know what's happening below you. If you don't, you still held accountable. When things happen within Fortune 500 companies, they don't blame the employee. You don't see an employee holding a press conference explaining what happened at Spirit Airlines. You see the top person explaining why things went wrong. Whether you know it or not, they call you. They call the head. They don't call the employee that made the infraction. But we don't get that same courtesy when it comes to police and prosecutors' offices. We don't get that same form of justice when it comes to inflicting harm in communities. There's no fairness nor any justice in that. So, to your question, I don't even try to avoid it. I swing for the fences every single time.
Got you. Got you. Adam, so talking to you, I know we talked about old school prison, right? And old school prison, everybody gets thrown under the bus at some point in time, right? Because we're gonna throw sex offenders under the bus, we're gonna throw the rats under the bus, we're gonna throw XYZ under the bus. This is a reality, right? So I wanted you to kind of talk to that a little bit more from your perspective, knowing that you come from that level and have to now work in this new world that we're in.
Um, I want to piggyback a little bit of what Ken said because my wife and I talk about this all the time, and this accountability piece is flipped on its head. So you've got the least of us being held the most accountable, and the people who are being paid to be able to do these jobs are being held less accountable because they have the positions, which is ridiculous, but it's also why the status quo tries to protect itself. Um, One of the things that I had to do personally, because like you said, I started in 1990. Now, some people will say that isn't old school because if you weren't there in the 80s and you weren't there during the riots, okay, I get that. But 1990 is a long time ago, and just from my A prefix to my B prefix, I saw what a difference there was in prison. And then over those 27 years, it changed more. So I had to change things internally because, again, everything's done through relationship. So I looked at this a little bit differently. There's nobody to throw under any bus. And if I don't allow a bus into my neighborhood, there's nothing to push anybody underneath. So one of the things that I try and do is what's the goal? If the goal is for people to be safer, to be happier, to have a better quality of life, then it's people. It's not sex offenders. It's not murderers. It's not exonerees. It is people. So we need to figure out what we need to do to help people. And one thing is for sure, if I push Ken under a bus, it ain't gonna help him.
Got you. Got you. Well, so as I bring this question to Linda, I'm actually in the chat trying to find what Linda said because she said something dope about a bus. I feel you though, Adam. I don't want to bring the bus to the hood at all, right? But I did like what Linda said about the bus, and that is if we all, the intention is for all of us to get on the bus and make it to the destination. I'm paraphrasing, Linda. But so with that being said, you want to kind of chime in and tackle that a little bit from your perspective?
Yes, exactly what Kenneth said before. There was knowledge about these behaviors and these tendencies before these actions played out for the entire world to see on television. Accountability, something that we're held to. We were held accountable for something that didn't even happen or for something that we didn't participate in, be it Ken's or my case or any of the wrongfully convicted. So, accountability is key when these behaviors are seen, when we find out that it was misconduct that led to a conviction, or we find out that it was perjured testimony. We need to hold people accountable on both sides of that justice line, both scales. There's the scales of justice, there's the scales of injustice, and we need accountability on both sides. If you're being justly sentenced, as Adam said, he committed the crime, but you were over sentenced. It sounds like to me terribly. Who was responsible for that over sentencing? Someone needs to be held accountable for that and learn the proper way to do things. In my case, there was so many infractions of the law that was not committed on a criminal side. It was committed on the legal system side. Where do we begin correcting that behavior? So each of these people need to get on the bus of doing things right, of holding themselves accountable, of holding their office accountable, and limiting the ability for people to commit these infractions. When you notice you have an officer who has these tendencies, they need to be pulled, put them behind a desk, put them in front of a psychiatrist, put them on leave, put them in a different job where they can't commit these problems. Prosecutors, the same. I was in the medical field for a while, and a lot of nurses said, when we experience burnout, we need to change departments. Doesn't people in the legal system, don't they experience burnout? Don't they get complacent with things? Shouldn't they maybe change departments for a while so that they can take a mental break from that area, but still contribute? There just needs to be ways for people to bring everybody on board that bus and make sure everybody is doing things properly.
Appreciate that, Linda. I wanted to highlight something Wendy Siegel Otwell said in the chat. Sentencing inconsistency is something we need to correct as well. I just wanted to highlight it because of how it was connected to myself. I was also over sentenced. I was able to get back on appeal. I was able to get resentenced based on finding the inconsistency in my case on appeal after I was in prison 11 years. So I did go for resentencing and get a shorter sentence based on that incorrection. Um, Moving forward, I got a question that I want to address to Adam first. And it kind of connects to me as well, in the sense that I've been connected to the criminal legal system since I was about 13 years old. I was on probation until I went to prison at 18 and was in prison until I was released in 33 and then on parole for a couple years after that. So, my question to you, Adam, how do you think about the different phases of your engagement with the criminal legal system? What led up to your case? What happened after you caught your case? through your incarceration and your reentry experience. Now, of course, 27 years, you got a nice amount of time, so we don't need like a recap of the entire bit, but just kind of a summarization of like the feelings or the connections that you made from each level.
I mean, anybody who's ever been down knows that one of the most powerful and life-changing things that takes place very seldom has to do with staff. It has to do with the old heads that breathe on you. And most people don't realize that. They think people are there to take you down the wrong path. Had there have been more self-help programs, more programs that we put on ourselves, and less talking at me, I probably wouldn't have come back for a B prefix, because I didn't want to come back to prison, but I also didn't really care if I did and didn't believe that I could necessarily stay out. I want to share something real quick because my wife shared this with me, and this is what I think often takes place um, in prison programming when you have staff doing things that myself or a Ken or a Q or somebody like that could be offering. You could offer the exact same material, but it's going to be taken a different way. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is a person who knows everything, but there's this chasm between them. So all that knowledge just falls away. It never makes it to the other individual. So that's the thing that I can see myself is people breathed on me, but I didn't get enough exposure to it. You know, you learn a language by immersion. When you get sent to prison, you get immersed into a crazy society. I always called it a hyper-social environment and an anti-social setting where you have to be extremely social. You have to deal with a lot of people, and you also have to be antisocial at the same time. So you never really get that immersive experience and positivity. So we need to create those. We need to create those kind of environments, and because you can't be expected to do them yourself, which is exactly what I did for a number of years, and then it kind of brought itself to me. I had some people in my life. I had multiple epiphanies along the way because one of them was never going to be enough. I was too deep. I was too deep to have a single epiphany. So they gave me time. It wasn't the time that they sentenced me to, because if you did a more immersive program in there, you wouldn't need that kind of time. And also the wheat would separate itself from the chaff.
Got you. Got you. I'm gonna go to Linda with that same question, but I want to kind of tailor it a little bit to you in the sense that your situation was you were arrested, found guilty, sentenced, and then exonerated, released right after appeal, but are still waiting for the conclusion of the case to happen, right? Those things being your circumstances, what are your feelings or what are your takeaways from your connection to the criminal legal system?
Well,
There are different phases of experiencing it. I'm sorry.
I've had a lot of positive experiences with the legal system. My negative experiences are completely centered around just this case. I've never had a negative experience with the legal system prior to this. This opened my eyes to how much or how frequently others have negative experiences with the legal system as well. And it also opened my eyes more to racial disparities. So, being in prison, even though I was there experiencing my own set of circumstances, I was a spectator in others' experiences with the legal system, either at the moment or what they had already gone through. And because I dug in deep to learn as much about the law as I could to fight my own case, I also began learning about other people's fights and people like Adam being sentenced far above what the anticipated sentence was is very real here in Michigan. So I can't say that all my experience has been negative nor positive. I have seen enough of both sides of it to know that there are a lot of problems, but there are some good things in there. I also experienced, just as Adam said, the people inside. The women's prison must be much, much different than the men's, in more than just the gender, because in the women's prison, it's a community, and you are looked out for or you are looked down on. And there are so many people that are trying to make the community as good of a place to be, which are by and large the inmates.
Hmm.
It's it's just so my experience with the legal system is much, much different, I think, and unique, as you said, than some of the other people would expect.
For sure, for sure. Um, I want to let Adam just go ahead and say his goodbye because he has to take off a little early.
Yep. I'm trying to get a transitional house for us, so I got to go look at it. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you trusting me with your time. And know this, the one thing that I knew when I came home was the only product I had was me. Your story is valuable. Don't give it away. And don't let anybody else tell you how you should share it.
Thank you, Adam. We appreciate your time and your story. That being said, Ken, I'm gonna move that same question over to you. Um, mainly, and let me read it to you real quick. So, the different phases of the criminal legal system, like what led up to your case, what happened after you caught your case, and then your experience inside, as well as your reentry experience. Um, got kind of touch on those different experiences for you, especially from the exoneree side of things.
Listen, man,
Because you had to do a bit, right?
I did. I mean,
Yes, sir.
I was sentenced to die in prison. Like, let's be clear, right? I had two natural life sentences plus 40 to 60 years. I'm
Hmm.
from Detroit. Running from the police was a sport growing up, and the winner was judged by who made it home and who didn't. So, from the very early stages of life, there was a negative connotation associated with the uniform, right? I was taught to distrust the police because of what they wore and what they represented. It wasn't until my later years in life, being an adult and being incarcerated, that I started to realize that I was judging the uniform and not the person. It took
Hmm.
years for me to understand that I was doing it wrong, right? The first hard lesson that I ever learned was from a correction officer in prison. He showed me what to do and what not to do, who to be around and who not to be around, right? That was a lesson that was taught to me by someone that I was raised to believe was the opposing party. And no matter what I did, he represented the system. But that same representation was the person helping me navigate a highly volatile environment. So for me, um, my understanding and trust for people began to change as I got older because I started to understand the system better. And I'll be completely honest with you. Like right now, the way I view things is totally different than how I did as a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid, right? I mean, most of the people on this call may not know it, but there's somebody on this call that is a retired police officer that played a heavy role in my exoneration. A heavy role. Without her, I probably would not be free today. So
Hmm.
the way that I look at law enforcement or the legal community, it's different from how I did as a kid. My vision, my view of how I see the system is different because I understand things more, right? I've seen bad police officers. I know what that looks like, right? My life was taken at the hands of bad police officers. However, it was also good police officers that played a role in restoring my life. I've seen police officers do good things in the community. So I know now at 38 years old that not all police officers are bad. We need the police. We just don't need the bad ones. My understanding of the system was an evolutionary process. Everything I was taught to believe as a kid turned out to be false as an adult. Not all of them are bad. Not all of them are out to get you. However, those people do exist.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely appreciate that. I think I probably did more of the evolving and learning work um, after prison, more so than while I was incarcerated. Um, but, like I said earlier, I've had dealings with the criminal legal system since I was about 13 years old. Um, and in large part, I think what you said earlier about the why um, is a large part of the fix to most of the issues, right? My interactions, I actually wrote about the book that I just released is me writing about, what I recognize as being like challenges based on the whys. It's not necessarily steps to coming home, but it's talking about my interactions with the criminal legal system and how to better work with that as a person that's incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. As saying that, I would like to move to Linda's question, the next question. And I also see Kate McCracken had a question from SJM in here for the Q&A part. I definitely want to highlight that. So this is my last question for you guys, and then we'll get back to Kate's question. So to Linda, we tell stories to have a positive impact on society. Can you share an example of the positive impact you've seen from telling your story?
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
I couldn't get this icon to come back up. Okay. Well, I have a huge silver lining from my incarceration. I met some of the most beautiful people that I currently know while I was incarcerated, other inmates, my sisters who are here now. The education I received, the way that my eyes were opened during that incarceration gave me a new direction in life. And while I'm in this particular posture that I am, awaiting a new trial, I have to bite my tongue and sit on my hands so frequently. But when I do have an opportunity to speak, I'm able to speak with experience and a knowledge that I would have never possessed had I not had to go through this experience. So I am grateful for that silver lining because we all need to find the positive in the negatives. Because if we can't find them, we're truly, truly in a bad state that we can't appreciate the positive. And we can talk about our evolution, but I also went through a huge evolution. I went through being, basically soccer mom to incarcerated in 0.2 seconds flat and received an entire education that I never would have received had I not gone there. And I have friends from different communities that I would not have had I not gone there. I have women who I'm proud to call my sister that I would not have known had I not had that education. So, sorry, I'm going
Okay.
to.
Safe space.
It's just that my experience was not all negative, and I'm very glad to be able to share the knowledge that I have so that I can bring about some positive change where possible.
And same question to you, bro. Give me an example of when you've been able to tell your story and there's been a positive impact from that.
I think every time I tell my story, at least that's me, and it could be me being arrogant or bold, but I think people need to hear about what happens when we get it wrong. Like the system can be a gift and a curse to a lot of people, but when it comes to situations where we get it wrong, it can be very wrong. And I think the difficulty associated with that is, unfortunately, we still live in a country with the death penalty. We could literally be killing the wrong person more often than we realize it. And, you know, to at the end of the day, I f- I understand my responsibility as an advocate. My job is to change people's minds and hearts by telling my story. We win by changing people's perspective of how they view the system. So the understanding for me is no matter how gruesome, no matter how negative, no matter how bad the story may be, it's the truth.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Um, and from a personal perspective, I mean, that's essentially what made me start my podcast was the feeling that the telling of the story mattered as much as what actually happened. I didn't have a lot of people telling this story that I would be able to pull information from to make better choices for myself, right? I'm also a advocate or I do peer navigation for youth at Peckham here in Lansing, right? If I was not able to tell my story, I would not be able to help them navigate some of the things that they go through at the ages of 16, 17, 18, that I didn't have anybody to help with. So telling your story, I definitely see the value and the impact of telling one story. Linda, you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, I think when you take some of the people who have been wrongfully impacted, wrongfully convicted, you have a roundtable of people who can tell about the situations that they had to navigate coming home and how to make it better for others coming home. When you have people like yourself who were incarcerated for whatever reasons, you have the ability to take that pool of information and knowledge. When you have officers, prosecutors, each one of us has a pool of information and knowledge that is critical. It's just how we use that information that impacts others. And, you know, Kenneth is out there able to be in the forefront on the lines. I have to be in the background. You are able to be on the forefront. There are people behind you that are in the background. Each one of our voices are important in the way that we're able to share them because our knowledge is important.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Agreed. That being said, that was my final question for the panelists. I appreciate you guys stepping up and answering those questions. But now it looks like we have a little bit of time, so I would like to open it up to for a couple of questions. I saw, like I said, the question from Kate McCracken earlier, so I would like to highlight that, raise that up. Was there anything? Let me check with my semi team. Jen, Chuck, were there anything that you wanted to add or jump in with before I move to the Q&A section?
Go ahead for that. Let's start with Kate's question.
Okay, let's do it. For Q&A, given the media tends to lift up negative, particularly in this space, how do you ensure your message is the primary focus? With this in mind, and as seasoned public speakers, what is the number one tip you would share to a new public speaker? So I guess I know Linda for being a public speaker and speaking on her story, so I'll start with Linda and then I go to you, Ken.
Could you please repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am. So the media tends to like highlight the negative aspects inside of this space, right? In the criminal legal systems space. We see a lot of the negativity. How do you ensure that the message that you are speaking when you speak is the message that is the primary focus? And is there any tip that you would give a new public speaker
Well,
when delivering their message?
I generally will take notes before I go to anything. When Jensen A sent me the information here today, I sat down and thought about each question and thought about my personal experience as it pertains to each question. When I speak with legislators, I take notes. I ask them questions and I redirect back to those questions and those answers that they've given, whether I'm redirecting back to them or taking those answers to someone else and letting them know, hey, this is what I've learned and why is it this way, or what can we do to change this way. I think that making sure that you have good information is critical for you to be able to keep it moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Ken, what about you? When you're speaking, when you're dealing with, the media, how do you make sure that the message that you're trying to get across remains the primary focus? And do you have any pointer for a beginning speaker?
Absolutely. So listening to Linda, it kind of she was saying what I was thinking, just in different words, right? There's two very important things when doing public speaking. One is know your audience. Who it is that you're talking to is how you tailor your message. And the second part of that is always stay in control. You have some media outlets or reporters that they lead from a negative place, right? Their questions are designed to trip you into a negative response. But staying in control of your own self is extremely important. Having accurate information is extremely important, but also learning to redirect, right? When a reporter is talking to you, you're in control of the interview. Whether you choose to answer or not is up to you. How you answer or not is up to you. So if you don't like the question, you redirect to the answer or the specific topic that you want them to stay on, right? And again, a very important point is know your audience. I'm going to talk to someone in the community totally different than I'm going to talk to a legislator. I'm going to talk to a legislator totally different than I'm going to talk to the chief of police. All right. Knowing your audience is extremely important because channel 2 might ask a question in a certain way, and channel 6 up in Lansing might ask that same exact question in a totally different way. So knowing your audience and who the messaging is for is extremely important. Maintaining control at all times.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I agree. The only thing I guess I will add to that as a public speaker is knowing your message through and through. When you get in any position with a microphone or camera or anything in front of you where you're telling your story, you should know what your message is so that you're not sidetracked from the message. And in order to kind of keep it the primary focus, I recently learned to repeat, always repeat what your message is. That way you can't miss it because I said it over and over and over again in this time frame, regardless of, like you said, Ken, how you ask the question, or even sometimes the question you ask. I might just answer with the answer that's already prompted for me. Um, I'm looking at the chat to see if we can find a couple more. We got a few more minutes. I think there's a big difference from Wendy Siegel Otwell. I think there's a big difference between when talking to people who have no experience with the system. Does your strategy change in those cases?
Yeah, that's an easy one. Yes.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yes is the answer to that question. It's an easy yes, because the reality is when you're talking to most people, right? It's you have to make the story relatable. You have to make the story relatable to something that they can relate to, right? The message is lost when they don't understand you. A perfect example. People that have never been to prison don't know the meaning of the yard or cool shots or, this totally different language that you develop while being incarcerated. So you have to make it relatable to people in order for them to understand it. Um, and for people that truly don't understand it, I mean, sometimes it takes some time for you as a speaker to figure out an analogy that helps them understand what it is that you're trying to say. Um, I know that there's a lot of people that have good intentions. There's a lot of advocates that have great intentions, but never seeing the things that people like us that have been incarcerated have actually seen with our own eyes or dealt with personally. They could never be as great of an advocate as someone that has seen it, right? I, I'll be the first to say anybody that makes $1 million a year could never speak for me. You've never seen the things that I've seen. You've never experienced the things that I've experienced. You don't have the same plight that I had to get to where you are. So for me, it's the same situation, just in reverse. Like, yes, you can be very helpful to some extent, but there's limits to what you can speak to.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Linda, did you want to speak to that?
I don't think I could add anything to what Ken said. He's always so very good.
Respectable.
I'll
I
have to follow up
agree.
like that.
Agree. If there are any other questions, you can add them to the chat at this time. While I'm waiting for any other questions to be added, I did add my podcast to the chat as well for you to check out if you want to get a few more conversations and hear a few more conversations relative. Chuck, you had something you wanted
Yeah,
to
I've
add?
got a follow-up question from what Ken just shared. Thank you for saying like there's limits to, I'm not formally incarcerated. I'm not just as impacted in that way. So what is your request for folks who haven't been where you've been, who don't have that same experiences in terms of how we talk about the system and the effects it has on people?
I think the easy answer to that is basically just know your limits, right? Know how far you can go when trying to be an advocate, because there's nothing interchangeable with experience, right? I traded my innocence for experience. I can sit before you today and tell you about things that I saw because I traded my innocence in order to be here unfairly, right? I didn't ask to go there. However, for the people that are, I mean, the reality is we need people like you, right? You can get into rooms that I would never have access to. You can also give me a seat to a table that I would never be able to sit at. So the reality is we need people from all walks of life to be a part of the movement, because the reality is people ask all the time, right? How can I be helpful? The reality is you can be helpful by giving me access or giving us access, right? Allowing someone to tell their story in a place that they would probably never have access to changes people's perspective, because everybody thinks they know about the system, right? The kudos to the media. The media has done a great job at reshaping how people view the system. However, there are bad sides to that as well. But if not for the media reshaping how the masses of society view the negative approaches of the system, we probably wouldn't be where we are. I mean, let's be honest, right? It was just a few years ago, officers started wearing body cameras. It wasn't that long ago that this started, right? There were certain segments of society where things were happening that nobody believed them until it was put on TV. Until we could see it with our own eyes, nobody believed that it was truly happening. So I think, you know, the advice would be, one, know your limits, and two, always be willing to accept advice from people that have that lived experience. Unfortunately, criminal justice reform is one of those things that nobody cares about until it touches your doorstep, until it affects someone near you or close to you. Most people don't care about it. But, for those that have a truly unique desire to be helpful, educate yourself as much as possible.
Appreciate that, Ken. For the sake of time, I'm sorry. I should have probably done this a while earlier. But the link is in the chat for the evaluation. I know a few people have had to leave a little early, but please, when you get off of the Zoom or open up another panel, fill out the evaluation. It helps us as we move forward. Linda, did you want to touch on that question at all?
I think the biggest thing to reiterate from what Kenneth said is access. He is absolutely right. We cannot speak to another person's experience. We cannot speak to the outcome for another person. We need to include them.
Definitely do that. I'm sorry, I'm on the road taking my kid to school. My bad.
Drive safe. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Everyone have a great evening, great rest of your day. See you soon.
Take care.